Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Iconic Dollcast. My name is Sage, your host. Welcome back to another episode all about dolls. Thank you so much for listening. This week's episode, you guys, I'm so excited for. This was so special to me. I am going to be interviewing the author of American Girl, Courtney's books, Kellen Hertz, and I have a lot to say about this, and I just want to say that I am recording this at the last minute. I am recording this intro and the outro for later, the day this episode is being released. I've never done this before, and it's so last minute because I have a lot to say about this character, this doll, these books. If you've been listening to the show for a while, you know I am obsessed with all dolls, really, but American Girl is a really special doll brand to me. I grew up with American Girl. I learned about history starting with American Girl, and for the longest time, I was really just into those core original historical characters up to Kaya, and I'd never really embraced or looked into the others. And when I started this podcast, if you guys don't know, I've said it a few times, but just in case, the original concept of this podcast was actually just going to be an American Girl doll and book and character and world deep dive. And slowly but surely, it evolved into what it is now, and I never ended up doing much of the American Girl stuff. I do talk about them quite frequently. I have people on the show to talk to about American Girl, but I haven't really dived into the brand fully as a full podcast. And so when I was doing that originally, I was revisiting the books, and it just really brought back so many amazing memories for me. And then obviously I shifted the way the podcast was going to go. And I guess recently, maybe within the last year, I revisited, the last 2 years really, revisited the books again. And I decided I was going to check out some of the new girls. And I mean, we all know American Girl has really shifted away from the focus on historical dolls, which is such a bummer to me. But I decided to look into the new girls. And so for Christmas, I think it was, Christmas last year. Well, no, let me backtrack a little bit. Sorry, this is going to be a lot. I have a lot to say. So I started started learning about some of the new girls. I checked out Julie. I checked out, who else was it? I can't even remember. It was Julie and someone. But anyway, got super into it again. And then for Christmas last year, I decided to treat myself, and I bought myself a Courtney doll. And I really knew nothing about Courtney other than I thought all of her clothes were super cool. I really like the 80s, even though I was born in the 90s. I've always kind of felt a connection with the 80s. And so I bought Courtney, and I bought her books as well. Hadn't read the books. Courtney arrived with her books. And for the first time ever, I literally sat my ass down and I read through both of her books. Courtney only has 2 books, which is really unfortunate. I wish she had more, because when I tell you that I think, honestly, I relate to Courtney more than any other American Girl in the entire historical series. I will say I have not really checked out Isabel or Nikki. I think that's their names, the twins that are their time frame is the 90s. And I think I haven't really gotten into them because I'm not really quite sure. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think their books are really. I mean, Courtney's books are drastically different from the original American Girls. Like, she doesn't have 6 books. There's not a theme to every book. But I think even Isabel and Nikki's stories gear way further away from that than Courtney does. But I sat down and I read these books in one day. And when I tell you guys, I was so, first of all, just into it. I was like, this is so great. But I was also extremely touched. American Girl has always done a really good job with, conveying history to a certain age group and making it appropriate, watering it down. Obviously we've dealt with some major plot points in history, like Addie's story and Addie escaping slavery. And I've always respected American Girl from that. I think they get a lot of a lot of criticism for it sometimes, because it's like, well, that's not real history, blah blah blah, and it's like, okay, but you have to understand, like, these are meant for a certain age demographic, and they can't really dive deep into that without literally scaring children. But I do think they take what they can and they make it work. And so when I started reading Courtney's stories, I mean, we've got subjects like blended families, we've got the Challenger explosion, we've got AIDS. My jaw was on the ground because I was like, I cannot believe American Girl, especially with AIDS. I just I could not believe that American Girl approved that. And I mean, it's great, it's excellent, it's amazing. And when I talk to Kellen, she's going to tell us a lot more about that. But I just was so touched. And I think I relate to Courtney so much. And I say this in the interview. I just feel like Courtney is so average. And I don't mean that in a bad way. You know, she's just a basic kid growing up in the 80s. And even though I was born in the 90s, I just felt like there was I could just see it in my head. Like when they're watching the Challenger live on TV, they bring out the little cart with the TV on it. Everyone remembers those from my childhood, at least. And just so many things that it was just like, oh my gosh. And I remember learning about the Challenger in third grade. I actually had a teacher who was there. And with the whole AIDS thing as well. I mean, I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, and I don't know what education was like across the country in the 90s, but I was educated about AIDS and HIV and how people got it several times. And one thing I will say is when I was thinking about what I wanted to do for this episode, it just brought me back, and I thought about the school district that I was in. They brought in this lady. Her name was Barb, and she is an AIDS activist, and she was diagnosed with AIDS in the 80s because she was hanging out with the wrong crowd. And I just remember her story being so powerful and impactful. Like, I never forgot it. I can still see this lady's face in my mind. I will say I did try to contact her to be a part of this episode, but she didn't get back to me, and that's all right. No hard feelings. I don't even think she saw my message, but reading these Courtney books was so big for me. It just brought back so much, and I think the characters are fantastic. There's a lot of stuff about women's rights in these books, and just, I don't know, Courtney being an amazing friend. And I'm not going to really spoil the books too much because we're going to talk about them so much in the interview. But I mean, at the end of the day, the second book, especially for me, the one that deals with Courtney and her friend Isaac, who has AIDS, and he got it, or no, he has HIV. Let me be correct. And he got it because he has hemophilia, and he got it from a blood transfusion. And what I loved about that is that, I mean, already AIDS is such a intense topic to be putting in a children's book, but the way Kellen really put it together, I thought was so fantastic. She didn't make it, there were no like stereotypical things that you would think of when you think of AIDS in the 80s. I mean, in the 80s, AIDS was a gay disease, and if you had AIDS, you were gay. That's how you got it, which is obviously just not true. And I just think Kellen did a fantastic job telling and writing this story. And instantly I was hooked. I was like, oh my God, I'm obsessed with this doll. I'm obsessed with this character. She's got the most incredible collection that most of it has been archived already, or maybe even retired, which I don't understand. She has a working Pac-Man machine, because Courtney's a gamer. And yes, got to talk about this. Courtney is a gamer. And honestly, when I got the doll and I saw the books, my understanding was that the whole story was going to revolve around gaming. And there is some stuff. She makes this incredible character in her head called Crystal Starshooter, and it's super cool. But I mean, the plot does not revolve around Courtney being a gamer. But anyway, she has a working Pac-Man machine. She's got a working stereo or cassette player. She's got a freaking working TV. And when I found this out, I was like, oh my God, I have to have it all. I have to have it all. I got all the clothes that I could get. I have most of her collection. Sadly, I do not have the Pac-Man machine still. It's so expensive, and I'm just not willing to pay $200 for it. But one day I will get it. But I mean, she's just a fantastic doll. Great books, great characters, great collection. I will say Courtney's got a mix and match collection, which is basically where you can buy like several pieces and just kind of mix, like it says, mix and match it. And I don't think that would work on any other doll unless she was in the 80s. And I mean, I could just go on and on and on about how much I love this doll and how just like impactful her stories were. So I was so excited when I reached out to Kellen Hertz, asked her to be on the show, and she agreed. So I'm very, very excited for this. We're going to get into it right now. As always, please follow me on Instagram, iconicdollcast, or Britney Spears Custom Dolls. Follow me on TikTok at Britney Spears Dolls. And here is my interview with Kellen Hertz, all about American Girl Courtney. Okay, everyone, I am so excited because this week I have American Girl author Kellen Hertz on the show to talk about one of my favorite American Girl characters of all time, Courtney, and so much more. Kellen, thank you so much for being here today. How is it going?
It's going great. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. This is, I think, my first podcast ever. So
Oh my gosh, so
excited.
exciting. I'm excited
Yeah.
too. So before we get into Courtney, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you found yourself where you're at today.
Well, I grew up in California, like Courtney, in the 80s, like Courtney. And I started writing when I was really young. I wrote a play when I was 12. I did like a workshop, like a weekend, like writing workshop for like seventh graders or something. It was just like kind of a dramatic writing. It had just gotten started in my hometown, and it went really well when I wrote this thing. And so the teachers who were running this seminar said, "Oh, you should be a writer. You should write more." And of course, what kid doesn't want to be told that they're good at something? So I was immediately like, great, I'll do it. And so I started writing. The first thing you should know about writers is that we exaggerate everything. So I was not 12, I was 13. I was 13, but I started writing that year basically. And I wrote a lot in high school, and then, thought I wanted to work. Well, I did want to work in TV and film, like as a writer. I mean, but I always loved books. As I got older and started working in TV, I still read a lot of kids' books, just because I think that there are a lot of female perspectives in those books that don't often get, at least when I was in my 20s or 30s, I didn't feel like there was a lot of other options out there that I was interested in. And I can always relate, even though I'm old now, I can always relate, the issues of being an adolescent and figuring out who you are and what you stand for. I feel like, we tell ourselves that we only go through adolescence once, but the truth is, I think over and over again in your life, you're constantly reevaluating who you are and asking yourself what you stand for and what you're willing to stand up for. And, so those themes are really strong in young adult literature, and so I kept coming back to them. And then I ended up getting involved with American Girl in a crazy, super lucky way. I had gone to film school, and I had written a bunch of screenplays, and one of them was about Elizabeth I as a teenager, actually, the Queen. And she and a friend of mine from film school had loved that screenplay, and like, she was a really big fan of it. And, cut to 10 years later, 15 years later after film school, and I had just had a baby. I was not working in television because television has very long, very intense hours, and I had saw on LinkedIn that this woman had gotten a job at American Girl, working, doing like their online content for different things. And we'd both sort of become producers basically. And so I emailed her and I just said, "Hey, I don't know if you guys ever hire writers, but I love the American Girl books and I love the brand. And So if you need anyone, thinking very long shot, she didn't even hire the writers, right? But then 5 months later, she just randomly emailed and said, well, actually, they're looking for someone who can ghostwrite one of the novels. Like, should I put your name in? And do you have a sample? And I said, sure. And I had never written a fiction book at that point. I had written like 10 screenplays and many other sort of television things, but I had not ever written a book. But I was a huge fan of the genre. So they sent in my screenplay, and then I talked with Jennifer Hirsch, who I don't know if you know who she is, but
Mhm.
she's like the executive editor. So she's like knows everything about the brand and is kind of the mastermind. She and Jodie Goldberg are like the ones that, know everything about every character. And it so happened that she liked my book or my sample, and then we had this long conversation where we talked about all the books that we loved as kids. And I talked a lot about how much I liked American Girl. Like, I remember being 14 and getting the catalog, the drawn catalog.
Mhm.
I never got a doll, but I did look at like the books.
Mhm.
Because I'm a big reader. And so what ended up happening was they needed a ghostwriter for a book that Lisa Yee was supposed to write, and she was working on a different series for a different thing. And so I ended up writing that book. Like, they paid me to write my first novel, which is like never happens, right? As soon as I did it, I was like, I am home. Like, I know exactly like what to do. I read a lot of the recent books too. I mean, I'd read a lot of Valerie Tripp's books.
Icon.
Yes, she's amazing. I actually spoke to her. I had a Zoom with her like a few years ago, which was amazing. But yeah, basically, like, I outlined this book and I wrote this book for them, and then it was Leah, Girl of the Year, Leah book 3, and then they gave, this is like every writer's dream. Like, I like poured over it. I was, every word I was like, it's right, it's right. Um, and then when they got it, they called me and they were like, this is the best first draft we've gotten from anyone in 6 years,
Wow.
which which really kind of blew me away. I really put my heart and soul into it, and I really wanted it to be, and I felt like it was a really good book, but I didn't like, it's the first time you ever write a book.
Right.
So it was a very much like, felt like, wow, they like really understand what I'm going for, and I really understand what they want. And after that ghostwriting job, they basically said, we have a character that is going to need three books. Do you want to be the name author? And your name would be on the cover. And I was like, yes.
Oh,
And then I like started crying. It was
I would
something out of
too.
a movie. I know. It was like something out of a movie, but from that point on, so that was like 10 years ago.
I was gonna ask you, like, I'm assuming because I think Courtney came out in like what, like 2020, maybe.
Yes.
So like,
Courtney.
so
Maybe 22. Might have been.
okay, might have been it more recent,
Yes.
but I'm assuming like the production on the whole character and everything takes several
Yes,
years.
it takes several years. Yes, because you have to design all the clothing, and you have to design all the collectibles and the parts for it, and then of course you have to write the book and develop who the character is and what their story is, and that's done in quite close conjunction with the products too, which
Right.
I think one of the things that makes it special. Is they really talk. Story is super, super important to American Girl.
Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah,
mean, they wouldn't
yeah,
be
yeah.
anything. Just to backtrack a little bit, I was just curious, did you grow up with dolls? Were you a big fan of dolls? Did you collect dolls? I
I
know.
did. I
Okay.
did not collect them. I did grow up with them. I had lots of different kinds of dolls. I had Barbies. I also had, my mom was really hippie, so I had like this Guatemalan rag doll that
Amazing.
had like rags for hair. And I loved it. I was slightly jealous of my sister because when I was a kid, my we didn't like spend that much money on toys. You know, we didn't have a lot of money, and by the time my sister came along, though, my dad had become a lawyer and like was doing really well, so she got all the really cool Barbies, and I mainly got the Guatemalan rag doll, to be honest.
A doll is a doll, okay?
Right.
And I mean, with American Girl specifically, so just to give you a little background on myself, so I grew up in the 90s, so I got my first American Girl doll when I was like 7, and it was Josefina. Um,
Hmm.
and a big part of why American Girl has always just really resonated. I mean, I had a bunch of them growing up, Josefina, Molly, Addie, all the
Hmm.
OGs, and a big part of why they became so important to me is that I was raised by my grandparents, and they were very adamant about learning tools for me because I
Hmm.
wasn't the type of kid that I loved history and I loved learning, but I wasn't like really down to sit down and read.
Hmm.
I just ADHD. I was like, no, I can do better things with my time. But the American Girl books were so just essential to my development, I think, because they really were the first books I remember actually picking up and reading.
Hmm.
Because my grandparents just like really emphasized the importance of history and obviously reading, and just with all of the historical accuracies, I just feel like for a 7-year old, like I was way ahead of the game compared to the other kids because I was learning about all the Civil War, World War II, the American Revolution,
Hmm.
all this stuff way before maybe even a 7-year old can comprehend fully. But the thing I always love and still love about American Girl is that even as an adult reading these books, yes, they're like definitely like watered down to be digestible by kids. Obviously, we can't get too deep into them because into the history aspects of stuff because history is scary, right? And I always appreciated just how they made it serious enough to where I was like, okay, this is a serious situation, but I obviously wasn't getting the brunt of a lot of these historical eras. And then as I grew
Hmm.
up, I never let it go. Like I've always been interested in history. Is history something that was always
Yes,
something
absolutely. Hmm.
absolutely okay.
Absolutely. Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah. I
I
mean,
assumed.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's like I said, the screenplay that I gave Jen was is about a period of time in Elizabeth I's life when she's 13, and like some very crazy stuff happened to her between the ages of 13 and 17. And so it sort of looks at that. But yes, I've always loved history, and also always sort of loved kind of role playing what it would be like to be in during live during certain periods, right?
Yeah.
And was growing up, compared myself and my situation as a kid and a girl, you know, kind of who felt kind of constrained by the expectations of what I should look like and how I should dress and what everybody thought that girls should do at that time, you know, and sort of I would compare it with like the 19th century, which they had far less
Right.
obviously rights. They also had cool dresses, which maybe made up for it, but not really. Um, but it was a good way for me to kind of check, to sort of compare like how and feel like, wow, you know, like a lot of the issues, it's like the more things change, the more things stay the same. Like they're still universal coming of age kind of things that happens when you're a human being, right? No
Yeah.
matter what. Um, the context of it changes because history changes, but and society changes. But I think that was one of the things I really enjoyed about history was sort of being like, oh, I'm not alone. At the same time, I'm a lot luckier than those people.
Totally, totally. And just, I mean, going back to that historical accuracy, just like I think for me as a kid, it was like so like fascinating for me to see. And American Girl does such a good job with their quality and their historical accuracy, where it was like, oh my God, like these these kids were wearing this back then, and they had this is what they had to play with. And I don't know, it was just always so interesting to me. And
Mhm.
then I kind of like I wouldn't say I gave up on American Girl, but like I definitely I definitely related the most or had the most interest in those first, I think, like seven core characters. And then I was just kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And then I grew up, right? But now I'm an adult. I have adult money, and
Mm-hmm.
I maybe like 3 or 4 years ago was like, I like need to revisit the American Girl series because like I remember loving it as a kid, and I couldn't remember exact things that were going on in these books. And then I kind of went through the first few and was like, holy shit, like this is so good. Like I am 34 years old and like I listened to audiobooks for my adult round of doing this. And I was just like,
Mm-hmm.
this is like amazing. And then I knew American Girl was still putting stuff out. I did feel like for a while, and maybe perhaps still, I think their focus on historical characters has kind of dipped a little.
Yes. I
Um,
wouldn't say that. I don't necessarily think that they want the it to wane, but I think that, they are a commercial company, and
yeah,
so they get told, you need to do more of X because it's selling better.
of course.
Is very frustrating because they have a very diverse base. People love them all over the country, and I think there's a lot of pressure on them to deliver, to do something that's accurate, that's sensitive, that's reflects the diversity of the country, that's historically correct. All of these things, they have to sort of be all things to all people, so that I think can be hard.
Oh yeah,
But they've tried. They're all, to their credit, though. I also think they're really, I've seen them since starting to work for them, because I work on a freelance basis for them. But I've become friendly with a lot of the editors, and so I see they're constantly trying things. Like they tried the twin dolls with
mm-hmm.
the '90s dolls, and with Tenny, which was one of my favorite things. We did a Logan doll, which was the first boy, which was very close to my heart because my son was only 2 at the time, and I was like, I can get him one. And not that I mean, I gave him both dolls actually, but he was very taken with the Logan and the drum set, and like it was really exciting for him to have a doll that like kind of looked like him and that he
Of
could,
course.
you
Of
know.
course. And I to this day I'm like, damn, like I wish they would have had a boy when I was growing up. Not that I really care because I love the American Girls. It doesn't matter. But
Hmm.
when that all came out, I was like, wow. And like not to say American Girl is still a fantastic brand, and I'm still
Hmm.
buying their shit all the time. I'm obsessed. But I go through these books and then I was like, okay, so I was like, well, I know that they've released like a ton since my time, right?
Hmm.
And started like looking at them and I was like, they're all right. And then I discovered Courtney and I was like, wait, what? The 80s? Like to me that seemed, I was like, that's so recent. Like whatever. It's not, but like to
I
me
know.
it was, and I got her and I'm not kidding you. I think I did not do the audiobooks for these. I literally sat down on my couch for I think it was like 4 or 5 hours, and I read through both of these books, and I was like,
Oh,
these are I'm not kidding. And I like I said, American Girl since 1997 for me. I've been in it. I am not joking, and I'm not just saying this because I'm chatting with you right now. I truly do think that these two Courtney books are probably some of, if not the best American Girl books ever.
thank
And
you. That means so much to me.
I say that because I just felt like Courtney was such a relatable character in the way that she's kind of average. And I mean that in like such a good way. Like, there's some of the newer one, like Rebecca wants to be a star and Melody wants to be a star. And like, I don't know, those ones those American Girls, like I'm sure they're great. And I know they've got great pieces and they're great historical periods, but I just kind of love how Courtney is just like a regular. She's got goals and stuff, but she's just average, right? And I think what she deals with is, for me, it's all reading these books. It was like, oh my gosh, this is all the stuff that when I was growing up in the '90s that was really being addressed in school. We've
Hmm.
got obviously her mom wanting to be mayor, women's rights. There is the blended family aspect of things. There's the AIDS crisis. Like this is all stuff that I think had been learned more about in the '80s that they really, at least for me, I grew up in Boulder, Colorado. So it's a little bit
Mm-hmm.
of a different place out than other. It's very open, very like laid back, and very. It's not diverse, but they tried really hard to make sure that we all understood about diversity,
Yeah.
right?
I feel like it's so funny. I was just in Colorado and had never really been there before, but I was just there recently for 10 days. And it really struck me that there's like an eccentricity and an open kind of hippie culture in
Absolutely.
Colorado that
Especially
I
in I
think
don't know where you were. Where were you in Colorado?
Colorado Springs.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that's yeah, it's kind of the same area. It's about an hour from here, but Boulder is
Hmm.
really the like hippie
Hmm.
town USA. And like I was a 7, 8 year old walking around with my American Girl doll and no one cared. That
Yeah,
kind
it's
of thing. And
amazing.
like brought him to school, whatever. But I sat and read these books and I was like, oh my gosh, this is brilliant. Like I really enjoyed it, is what I'm trying to say. And I think you did such a good job just because I
Uh-oh.
do feel like you made her so relatable in the way that it's like we can relate to all Felicity and Addie and Samantha and Molly, but again those time periods are so far removed from where we're at now, and this one felt
Hmm.
a little closer to me, and I just was like, this is great. And like I definitely have questions for it, but I want to know, like, when did the project start for Courtney?
So they're always brainstorming and they are always keeping lists of ideas of dolls that they want to do. To their credit, I think when it comes to the actual storylines of the characters, uh, they think about sort of what kind of doll it is, like what the era is, especially historical, obviously, what the era is, where the character's going to live, roughly. Doesn't have to be like a very specific, and what their likes and dislikes are. Like what are we going to do? Not necessarily for products because they're not super prescriptive about stuff like that. But they do, kind of roughly know. And then they make lists of, so for the 80s, they came to me and they were like, we think we want her to live in California, which is one reason they were coming to me because I grew up in California and they knew that. And they try to match the projects with writers that obviously have a similar background or, know something about the background of the character. So I had grown up in the 80s and I had grown up in California and they were like, we don't really know where. We were like, we're thinking, you know, beachy or something. And I was kind of like, oh, that's so cliche. Like, sorry, not to be like, I mean, I love obviously beach. That's what you think about when you think about California. But I grew up in Fresno, California, which is a very not decidedly not on not glamorous part of California. It's hot. It's really
Hmm.
hot. And there's a lot of they grow a lot of, almonds and grapes there. And, it's rural, but it was rural, but it was also a town. And then I also lived in a bunch of other parts of California. So they basically came and said that we want this to be our next historical doll. Like, we want to do 2 books. We might want to do a blended family because they had, with Julie, they had done a
Hmm.
divorce story, and they really wanted to do a blended family, and I totally was on board for that. But as far as what the stories were going to be about, they left that up to me, which was really great. You know, I had lived through everything. So the first thing I knew I wanted to do something about Challenger because I had sat through the Challenger splitting when I was 12.
So I learned about that when I was in third grade. Must have been like, nah, 1999, 2000 ish. The teacher that I had at the time, his name was Mr. Denler. He was actually he worked at a different school in a different state at the time. He he was one of the groups that got to go watch that happen. And it's something that stuck with me forever, like thinking about that. And then when I had no idea this was going to come up in this book, and when
Hmm.
I got there, I was like, oh my fucking god, like this is it. Like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. Okay, continue.
Yeah, yeah. No, so one of the things that we talked about is, we also talked about what a fun decade the 80s was, right? The 80s was super fun for clothing and for pop culture. And of course, I remember like wearing all my rubber bracelets and getting Cyndi Lauper, She's So Unusual when I was 10, and all of these things. But then when I thought back to my own childhood, I thought the thing about the 80s that felt it was a study in extremes for me as a decade. Being a kid, you're kind of a witness to whatever's happening around you, right? You're not actually able to like impact public events or really do anything for yourself. You're just kind of in this static position where things are happening to you and you're learning and growing, but you're not so aware of it, right?
Right.
It's more from your point of view as a 10, 12-year-old, you're like, feel like you're witnessing everything and you don't get to do anything. So that was part of, the other thing that they knew they wanted about Courtney was they knew they wanted her to be a gamer. And I had gamed. I was not a gamer like we had an Atari, we had a Commodore 64. I went to the arcade in the summer, but I was not like, that's not like all I did. I was much more of a movie kid. But so I thought about that and I thought about, well, I really felt like the 80s are kind of like this extreme decade where it's like everything was bright and colorful and amazing. But then there was this other side that was scary.
Yes.
And the other side that was scary was the Soviets and this idea of a Cold War, a nuclear war, right, that Reagan was talking about, and AIDS, this disease that was out of control and there was no cure for it. And if you got it, you were dead. And like the photographs of people who had it were just like heart-wrenching for me as a kid. And Challenger, which was sort of all the bright promise of the future. And they made such a big deal of it in my school when I was in elementary school. We did all the things that Courtney does in that book. Like we made stuff. We had a flying model above our heads of Challenger. We had pictures of Chris McAuliffe and the entire crew on the wall. And then, the television got wheeled in on the media stand for us to watch.
Yep.
And then it exploded. And to me, was so impactful. That sounds like it's a terrible word to use, but it was the first experience that I had ever had with trauma and the idea that like catastrophe, that life can turn on a dime, and that, you were very protected as a child from death. Most children, especially in the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very protected. You don't have to see Civil War, and especially in the 80s, we're so insulated from so much of that in this bright pop, bubblegum colored bubble. And so Challenger just was like this slap in the face of like, this is real life. And this can really happen anytime. And you can lose people you love at any time, and it can be out of your control. And how do you, as a little kid, deal with that? So I really wanted to write about that. And they were fine with it. I mean, I think they were a little bit nervous because they were like, oh, but it's the 80s and it's so much fun. And I'm like, yeah, you're going to get to have all the fun. You're still going to get to have the Walkman and the like bed sheets, which were the exact bed sheets that they made I had. So amazing, yeah, I was like, oh my God, the rainbow bed sheets. But I still wanted like that. And to their credit, I knew that they would be fine with it because, they're American Girl. They did Addie. I mean, they're not gonna, once you do a doll, it's about an escaped slave. There's a doll that's a doll, and then you deal with something like slavery in books for children. Like you're not scared of of pulling the punches, of going for it, And then after they did Challenger, I was like, well, I have to do AIDS because that was a similar thing for me is when I was in 6th grade, I had to do a report on a social event. And, that we got a list of things, the Iran Contra affair and like all these things and AIDS was it. Again, it was about connecting with Ryan White. I read People Magazine, and People Magazine had a picture of Ryan White on the cover. And this, my parents had talked to me. My mom my parents were both really interested in the newspapers, and so we read the newspaper every day, and and so they had told me about AIDS, but it wasn't really until I saw Ryan White that I was like, oh, like I don't understand. Like I thought
Right.
this grown-ups who got this, and that's when I learned about what hemophilia was and all of that stuff. And so to me, I thought, well, if I could do something that kind of, because I obviously never met Ryan White, but he had a huge impact on me as a kid, and his story had a huge impact on me, and the idea of like being able to move forward in a world even when you're afraid was really important to me, and I wanted to put that in the books. I felt like the Challenger story sort of talked about that too, and so I thought that if with AIDS, if I could do something that was even more personal to her, it would be a progression from the first book, because we were talking a lot about how as a gamer, she is a kid that is totally caught up in her imagination, which is absolutely how I was. I was constantly watching movies. I was constantly reading books. I was wanted to be in a different world, not in this like 110-degree sweaty,
Right.
sweat pit with palm trees. And so I could read all of these great kids books, and also I would read history, and I trying to escape from my boring town that I hated. I didn't hate it, but it was boring, right? And so yeah, so it was so what we realized was, me as an adult looking back at my childhood, I thought, well, if Courtney has a journey here, it should be a journey, and it's going to involve the Challenger, and it's going to involve AIDS. It should be a journey that goes from someone who wants to be a superhero or wants to be kind of this big fan, and imagine something, her version of herself and in her imagination, to someone who actually wants to get out into the world and do something and make a difference, and knows and doesn't necessarily have to leave behind the things that she loves. She's never going to play video games again, but she is becoming aware of the role that she can play in impacting society and other people. And to me, that the AIDS story was like a way to go from book one, which was a more remote story, to something that was really immediate. And the thing that was really crazy about the story was that I started writing it. We did the outline, whatever, and we were in final edits when the pandemic happened.
Uh,
And it was like,
Here we
I mean,
are.
obviously it was like terrifying, the pandemic, and awful, because my son had just started kinder, but at the same time I was like, oh my God, this book is like could actually like help people understand what it means to be in a situation where on a much grander scale than AIDS, but certainly no less, terrifying and personal. The thing about disease is that, you know, it's your own body. So it's
Right.
like this idea that something you can't see or touch can somehow come into contact with you and just like change everything for you is for a little kid especially very, very scary, because they don't really understand the concept of, germs. I mean,
Well,
where
and I think you kind of said this earlier, but I think what is so probably different from how I grew up and how you grew up is like when this was all happening in the 80s, like you said, no one knew what to do. And it was very, like, and it's kind of same with the pandemic, obviously. Like it was
Mhm.
like, what the hell do we do? Like, this is crazy. But especially in the 80s when it comes to AIDS, everyone was just so freaked out. I think you did such a great job with Tina's character,
Oh,
with
thank
that,
you.
because that is definitely what was going on. That was definitely happening, and people were freaking out. I'm sure kids too. They're only hearing little tidbits too, so they're just like, "Oh, we're all gonna die." Growing up in the 90s, like we were very educated on that, so it was a
Hmm.
lot less
Hmm.
scary. But like, and I don't know if that was just a Boulder thing, but they taught us about AIDS, and they taught us
Yeah.
you're not going to die if you hug someone with AIDS. Blah blah. No one had AIDS in our school that I knew
No,
of.
no.
And one thing that I think you did so well is that obviously in the 80s, AIDS was known as a gay disease.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone who is gay and who had, a large percentage of my listeners are gay men.
Mm-hmm.
What I loved about this book is that you brought it back in a way where it was like not only adults are getting this. I mean, Isaac is such a great character and he is a little boy who gets AIDS, and you could have easily made her teacher get AIDS or something and have it be an adult getting AIDS, and then everyone would assume he was gay or whatever. But the way you kind of flipped it and made it, it's so important for kids to see this. I wish this book would have come out in the 90s or the late 80s, because it's like, yes, anyone could have gotten it, and it's not just a gay disease. And I like how you did that, because even still today, when you hear someone has AIDS or HIV, I think there's still a little bit of an assumption like, oh, he must be gay or whatever. I think it's better now than it was. But it's like, no, this has been a problem for everyone since the start of time. And I really appreciated the way that you
Yeah.
handled the situation, because it is I have to be honest. Yes, I know that American Girl has done lots of, Addie is a great example of a very serious time in history. And it's very, I mean, I can't imagine how difficult those books were to complete and get together, just because you do have to
Mm-hmm.
be extra sensitive. But I was really shocked that you were allowed to talk about AIDS in a book. I'm not like I was like,
I was, yeah. I mean, I guess, it was interesting. Like I said, the whole thing, both books and the choice of those two events and, exploring them in the books really came from a super organic place. It came from my own lived experience. Like because we read the newspaper every day when I was a kid, I remember reading articles about AIDS, and some of them were very small articles at first, and then they grew over time to become big articles with pictures that were scary pictures because a man who has AIDS or a person who has AIDS at that time had Kaposi sarcoma all over their face, had withered into 95 pounds. I mean, it was just so horrific and sad to see. And I remember asking my mom, well, how did they get it? And I don't understand. And why aren't they doing anything? And she explained to me the process by which the government was trying to find a cure for the disease. But then she also explained to me the political reality of the disease, which was that because the population that the disease had started in were gay men, that it made it more difficult for the government, for scientists who wanted to fix the problem, to get funding, to get attention. It was all this fear-driven. It was just a fear-driven reaction to the disease and people who had it. And at the same time, I also remember Diana, at the end of the decade, seeing the pictures of Diana at a hospice for
mhm.
AIDS patients, and how moved I was as a kid by that, and how I thought like that is like a real leadership thing to do at a time when nobody knows, all this misinformation is spreading, to take a stand, not for like a political cause, but for humanity, for something really simple, which is that that this is happening to your fellow human beings.
Right.
And if you have compassion, and if you're brave, and if you have courage, and you believe in, what a real humanitarian is, this is how you behave,
Right.
like as a role model. And that was also really impactful to me. So all that stuff was like swirling around in my head as stuff that I thought should impact Courtney as she goes on this journey to become someone who is going to speak up and do something at the end of the book. And, I was thinking more about, I think at that point, we'd been through Trump. We'd been through Trump being elected. We've been through the Women's Day marches, Black Lives Matter. was not really started, had not started because that didn't really start during until the pandemic. But like, obviously police brutality. There's a lot of stuff that was like swirling around in my head that was like why I wanted Courtney to be about. It also had to do with her mom being in May and wanting to run for mayor, right? Her mom wants to have her voice heard too. And so when that happens with your parent, you as a kid often have sort of experiences, secondhand experiences through your parents and your siblings, right? Which impact your own as you process them, impact your own journey. And so that's sort of with Courtney, I wanted all those things to kind of, but to me, the Isaac story, it had to be someone she was friends with. I mean, it
Right.
had to be, because, and then and then I also thought, well, and what better way, what better conflict? You always want to give your characters the hardest time possible. Um, what better way to give her some conflict than to have her best friend from book one, start, be the person who's the one who's like the root of misinformation and
Right.
who's like really is bad, because then it forces you to look at like even people that are saying and doing awful things that you yourself would never do and that you would want to judge them for. They are also still people, and they also
Right.
need to be, you can't really just ignore them or dismiss them or say that they're like a waste of space. And Courtney couldn't, because this is the person that she's friends with. So it's like there's no way around it. You can only go through. You have to get out to the
Absolutely.
other side, which is
Yeah.
painful.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously they get through everything and that's great, but I don't know. I just especially I think I like the second book. I think the second book is just so I cried multiple times, which is so crazy to
Oh,
me because I'm like, what? I just felt like it was so moving and like I knew you had pulled from stories and I was gonna ask you, so you said everything kind of came together pretty organically. Was there any like products or anything that they really pushed at you and they're like, you have to put this in, you have to put this in?
they've never done that. That's another reason why I like working for them. One of the other reasons why I love them so much is, you know, my first book with them was the third book of a series that someone else had written. And so I had to literally take the ends of her story, and she had a necklace in the first two books of her story, and that was the product. And so I had to weave that in. That was the only time, the first and the last time I've ever had to do anything like that.
That's fantastic. And I also
Yeah.
loved how, because I mean, obviously she takes place in 1986. That's when Pleasant Company all came out. I love how she
Hmm.
got her Molly doll. That was it took me I was like, oh, duh. Like 1986. That makes
Yeah.
sense. Amazing. So when you're developing these stories, do they show you the doll beforehand or afterhand? I'm just curious.
Yeah, they don't. I mean, they've showed some ideas of of what they think the doll's going to look like and clothing and stuff. Usually if they have a pet that they really want to do that they've never done before, we'll talk about whether or not that's appropriate for, if they said like, we want her to live in Chicago in the 1890s and she needs to own an alpaca, I'd probably be like, no.
Right.
She can't own an alpaca because who in Chicago in 1890 would own an alpaca? Um,
But
or
everyone in the 1980s would
yeah,
own a guinea pig.
yeah, that's true. No, but that was definitely, as did I.
I had guinea pigs too.
Hamster, then guinea pig, then
Yep.
nothing. They died. But yeah, so that was part of it. I mean, yeah.
Do you remember seeing the doll for the first time? What was your reaction?
Oh, I loved it. I mean, I love the clothing, especially the scrunchies. I mean, I mean, I knew there was going to be scrunchies when they said that it was from the 80s. So I was
Yeah.
like, well, and because there was going to be scrunchies, the scrunchies then had to be part of the story. But I think the scrunchies would have been part of the story, whether I was writing the book with a doll and as part of it or not, just because there's very iconic scrunchies and silly,
Silly.
as we're kind of barrel like spiral perms and just perms in general were such a ubiquitous part of my growing up. My mom got perms. I got perms. My sister wanted to get perms, never could, and because she had, for whatever reason, my mother was like not going to do it for her. So yeah, so that was I remember the first time I loved it. I loved the curly hair. Like that was like my favorite part of her.
Please
Uh,
tell me they sent you one, right? They had to have
oh
sent you
yeah,
one.
yeah. No, they
Okay.
send me. I also have tennies. I have a couple tennies, and I have a Logan doll, and I have a Leah doll. Those are the three dolls that I've worked on.
Fantastic.
I'm consulted on a couple other ones, but like the ones that are like I consider mine. It's
Very
Courtney,
nice.
and yeah.
Is there a favorite piece that you think they did? Because I think the Pac-Man machine. I don't have it, but the
I
Pac-Man
have. It's
machine.
so funny that you say that.
Do you have it? Oh my God, that's so
Right.
amazing, and it works, right?
It works really
It's
well. That
crazy.
was again part of. They give you a couple dolls when you write the books.
Oh, nice.
And so what I asked for was instead of one of the dolls, I asked, can I have, two dolls and the Pac-Man machine instead? Just because my son is a huge gamer, so I wanted him to have it. And he's actually read the Courtney books, which is great. He's like the first time that he's like read anything that I've written. So and he really liked it, and he loves Pac-Man, so all the talk about Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man was,
It's just so
exciting for
cool.
him.
Yeah, and just so cool. I just think I bought up they archived a lot of her stuff really quick, and I don't know if that's just something
Yeah.
that American Girl. I think they've done that with a lot of the more recent dolls. So,
I heard a rumor they might be doing
oh,
more Courtney stuff. I don't know. I haven't heard. I mean, nothing official, but you never know.
I was gonna say Courtney deserves a third book. The one thing I miss so much is like with Addie and Samantha and Molly. Like there's so many stories or six books, and you've got all these offshoots,
Mhm.
and I'm like, we need more Courtney. We need it.
Yeah, I would love to write more Courtney. I have a whole series in my head planned of TV series of her.
Oh my gosh, I'd love
Well,
it.
like, and all of her side character. I love her, best friend who's the filmmaker. I think
Uh
he's
huh.
really funny. I mean, it's like you get to indulge all your love of like every, Goonies movie, Goonies and Gremlins and like all the memories that I have as a kid. I grew up in a very fairly diverse place too, so it was really fun. I always try to fit in like names of people that I went to like junior
Oh, I
high
love
with.
that. No, I love that. That's amazing. What do you think the most important message in Courtney's story is? I know that's a loaded question.
I mean, I think the most important for me in general is just don't be afraid. Like, don't be
Good.
afraid when something happens that is hard to understand, when something happens that um, you don't have an answer for. It can be really overwhelming. Now I'm going to cry. It can be really
Oh,
overwhelming, but you have the strength inside yourself if you give yourself time and you like listen to yourself. You will be able to.
totally. And that's like what's so cool about Courtney is that's like, I mean, that's literally what she does. And she's so, like I said, she's so average, but in such a great way. And she really is like, I mean, she could have easily just ditched Isaac when all that happened. I mean, the pressure that was on her is just, and I know I keep talking about the second book because the first book is so incredible too, but I just felt so like, just the pressure she must have felt, like her locker getting vandalized and all that stuff. It was just like, oh my God, she could have easily been like, yeah, never mind. Like, see
Yeah,
ya. But she stuck by him. And I just thought, she is the definition of a good friend. And there's some of the American girls. I always really loved Molly when I was
yeah, I love
little.
Molly.
But rereading her books, like Molly's
It's
not the
fun.
greatest friend,
Yeah, she's very right.
Which is can also be relatable, whatever. But I just was like, and it's funny that Courtney gets she resonates with Molly the most because I think they're
Hmm.
totally opposite.
That's
Just
funny.
with the way
I
that,
think that came from I resonated with Molly when I was a kid, and kid and Molly. Although Molly, yes, is a bit more of a bossy pants than uh, than 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 Kit, but they're both very strong-willed, which I
yes.
liked. And I think the thing about Courtney is that she is not as strong-willed as either of those characters, at least not at the beginning. And so the idea was always to grow her, let the reader see her grow into someone who is ready to get out there and say what she feels and defend the things that she thinks are important. Because she has it inside of her. She just didn't really wasn't aware of it at the beginning of
Right.
the story, the first book, you know?
Right. And then by the second, at the end of the second book, I mean, I think she's totally come into herself and she's just, I mean, she she puts together this incredible ordeal at her school that is just so powerful and I just love her. I just love her so much.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people do. Is there anything you wish they would have, sorry, I'm jumping all over the place. Is there anything you wish they would have made for her?
Buttons,
Oh,
like political
button.
buttons. Because,
Yeah.
buttons were a big thing in the 80s. Like I remember as a little kid, when Thriller came out, like people had like little buttons with the glove that Michael Jackson on it. And then Ghostbusters came out and they had like the ghost Slimer, and so I had a jean jacket that literally was covered in buttons. And some of them were political and some of them were just like Slimer from
Right.
from Ghostbusters. But it was like a way of expressing yourself through pop culture that I think was very 80s, signature to the decade. And I definitely was wanting.
But I think they nailed it pretty much. I can't really
Yeah.
think of, I mean, I love Madonna and I
Me
love how she got the little lace gloves and like
too.
I think when I got her, I like kind of she's in a different outfit right now, but I like took her outfit and made it a little more Madonna. Like I would have loved like a mesh screen, like a mesh top to put over. I know it has to be
Be
appropriate for kids
amazing.
and it's
I
so
know, but Madonna and Cyndi Lauper were so iconic for that time, and
had to.
everybody did dress like that because they loved those singers so much. Like the frou-frou skirts matched with like a jean jacket with the buttons and like the gloves and the little flats. I mean, it was very, I remember. I didn't get to dress like that as much because my mom was like not like having it. But I remember seeing teenage girls, when I was like 11 and being like, oh, I want to dress like
It's so funny. They have in like the end of the book, they do like the little peek into the past type thing.
that.
They have a picture of Madonna and it's very iconic. She's in her like VMA wedding dress. And it's so funny. I was like, I can't believe they put this in here. Little did I know the next book was going to be all about AIDS, but it's so funny. Her like belt buckle said boy toy and they like edited it out. I was like, okay, fair.
Okay, there's
At
American
least they
Girl.
at least they still put her in it,
Yeah.
iconic.
I mean, it makes me happy that that it means a lot to you because we did, right after the book came out, the second book came out. We were in the pandemic. We're like 6 months into the pandemic, so I was particularly interested to see what people were going to say, and so they have, Amazon reviews.
Hmm.
So you know Amazon and Goodreads, so you kind of like look at the reviews just to see like what people. And one of the very first reviews on Amazon made me really sad. It was a woman who was like, I bought this for my daughter or my granddaughter, and it has AIDS in it, and that's not appropriate to talk. And I cannot tell you the amount of time that was spent discussing the way we were going to deal with the disease, what we were going to talk about. And it was very much sort of guided by my own personal experience, like with my mom, and also what was age appropriate, right? And I don't think we did anything that was not age appropriate in the book.
No, I don't think so.
So it was very sad. For a second, my heart was like, oh, like I felt really crushed. And then like the next day or 2 days later, I looked and there were like three more reviews that were all like really positive and 5 stars, and you don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, oh.
Oh, for
Hey,
sure.
well, it is reassuring. And also because it wasn't done, the book wasn't written with the desire to like stir up conversation or anything, but I do think it ended up doing that because of the pandemic,
Hmm.
really, and the timing of it. But it really did come from a place of like, what are the like two or three most impactful things you can remember as a kid growing up? And that was one of them. So,
Well, I think you nailed it, and I think you did it in a very tasteful way. And like I said, I just really loved how it all got flipped into a way where it was like, well, this could happen not only to gay people. Gay people are not mentioned, and I think I understand that. Like, I don't think that's necessary information for a kid to get at the target audience. It's like, yeah,
yeah.
you could
If
have
she had been
mentioned,
2 years older, I
right?
think we would have had the conversation. She would have, we, Courtney and I, because she's my daughter. Courtney and her mom would have had the conversation that my mother and I had,
Yeah.
right? Which was a really frank conversation about what is homosexuality, what does that mean? What is it different? The history of being homosexual in this country, like where we are now, that sort of thing. The same kinds of conversations, frankly, that I have with my kid now.
Right.
Only now we're talking about pronouns, and now we're talking about the fact that some of his friends have two moms and some of his friends have two dads, and what does that mean? But to me, they're not conversations that should be avoided. They're like
Right.
the same conversations you have about everything, which is explaining the context of something and making sure your kid understands that people are people.
Right. And well, I also think like this book is a great conversation starter. And I do think a lot of when it comes to anything and just coming full circle back around to dolls, like we talk on this show a lot about how Barbie gets a lot of negative criticism, and it's often by adults who don't, I guess, feel responsible or don't like to take on the responsibility of explaining things to their kids. Like, well, Barbie's not a real person. Cause she gets a lot of flack for pretty much everything, right? And I find that it's often with adults who don't want to take on the responsibility of explaining things to their kids. They feel like it's not their job when it literally is. And I feel like perhaps the person who gave you a bad review, it's like, okay, well, don't you think this is an important conversation to have with your kids though? And it just seems like a lot of people who are
Right.
very negative it's because they don't want to talk about that kind of thing. And really what that's doing is just
Right.
making things worse in the end.
Right.
So
The thing, the least important thing about AIDS is the way it's transmitted. Like
yeah,
that is not what's important about
exactly.
AIDS. What's important about AIDS is, that it's a disease that had a huge, massive impact on the culture and the way that we deal with public health in this country. And it's just not, you know, that's why I also felt like I didn't feel like it was necessary, like you said, to like, do we need a jumping off to talk about being gay? No, not really, because Courtney is not exploring her own sexuality in the book. Nobody else in the story is exploring their own sexuality. It's really about how we treat something that is unknown
Right.
and the fear that comes with it, and how why people end up behaving, you know, why people end up, sort of in mobs of fear, basically.
Right. And
Uh,
I think had there been a gay storyline in this book, it would have just that gets very stereotypical.
yeah.
And instead of doing that, the way you flipped it was genius. So
Oh, thank you.
props to you. I already asked you if Courtney's gonna get more books. I love the idea of her getting like a TV show. That would be
Oh,
so amazing. Pitch
yes,
that.
I would love that. Obviously, yes.
Tell me a little bit what's next for you. What are you working on? What's going on in your life?
Well, I'm working on what I am. I've done a couple things for AG. Just like I wrote a podcast for them, which ended up not happening. So they're in a bit of flux, I think, AG. So I'm sort of at the point for me where I'm like, I've written like 8 books now, and so I've been working actually on a YA novel for the
Mm,
last year and a half, 2 years, between actual food money jobs, um,
right.
which is also based on a historical event. It's very different than American Girl. It's a little bit of Stephen King. It's a little bit of Stranger Things. So it's about teenagers and a group of teenagers who've been through kind of a trauma, and like them sort of starting to having to kind of investigate their own past, basically, from something that happened when they were kids. So
Very cool. I cannot
yeah.
wait for that. I gotta get into all your other books because I enjoyed these so much. I can't imagine that I wouldn't enjoy any of your other writing. Like it just all
Oh, thank you. Well,
seems
Tenny's really fun.
Yeah,
too.
I need to get into that. I've heard that before. Well, Kellen, thank you so much for doing this, and seriously, thank you so much for giving us Courtney Moore. She is an icon. She's a legend, and she's new. A lot of people are like very weary about older people, weary about new American girls, and I'm like, no, 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 you got to check out Courtney. But please tell everyone where they can find your works or find you on the internet.
Well, you can find me at kellenhertz.com, which is my website. And then also, of course, at Amazon and any really major bookseller that carries American Girl books, and the American Girl site, of course, which is my favorite
Amazing.
place.
Well, thank you again so much, and we will have to keep in touch.
Yes, thank you so much. It's an honor.
Courtney, 1986.
All right, that was so amazing. Thank you so much, Kellen, for coming on the show and talking with me about Courtney again. I love this character. She's also got you guys, Courtney has a full, I don't know if it's a full, she's got a soundtrack. She's got music videos. She's got this iconic song that I just played a little clip of. Hopefully I don't get in trouble for that, crossing my fingers. Courtney is an icon. Courtney is a legend. Courtney is the moment. I love this doll so much. I love the books. I wish American Girl would do more for her. I know Kellen kind of said there's a rumor maybe more Courtney stuff would be coming. I haven't seen that yet. Some of the other characters did get some new stuff. I also want to mention, why doesn't Courtney have a mini doll? Courtney needs a mini doll. She needs more of her collection. She needs more stuff to come back. She's amazing. And yes, Kellen, thank you so much for coming on the show. That really meant so much to me. Next week, guys, I am talking all about Broadway dolls. It's a fun conversation. Can't wait for that. That'll be coming out next week. As always, follow me on all the things. And if you are enjoying this podcast, please leave me a review, give me 5 stars. It really helps get my podcast out there to people who might be interested in it. And I will talk with you guys next time.